America 250, The Dogs, Episode 9, Bud and Old Drum. Welcome to America 250, The Dogs. One of these dogs became famous simply because he was in the right place at the right time. The other became famous because of a courtroom speech so powerful that people still quote it more than a century later. One wrote into history. The other became part of history. Two dogs, two very different stories, both remembered. The first dog became famous for where he went. His name was Bud, and in 1903 he accomplished something no dog had ever done before. He crossed the United States in an automobile. Today, that doesn't sound remarkable. But in 1903, it was almost unthinkable. America barely had roads. Most people still trusted horses more than automobiles. Many believed a cross-country journey by car was impossible. Yet one man intended to prove otherwise. His name was Horatio Nelson Jackson. And the entire adventure began with a bet. Jackson wasn't alone. He recruited Sewell K. Crocker, a mechanic whose job would be keeping their machine alive long enough to reach the East Coast. Together they set out in a Winton touring car called the Vermont. Their goal was simple: drive from San Francisco to New York City. The reality would prove much harder. The trip began in California. Every mile brought new challenges: dust, heat, mud, mechanical failures, roads that often weren't really roads at all. By the time they reached Caldwell, Idaho, they were already deep into the journey. Then fate intervened. After leaving town, Jackson realized he had forgotten a coat. The travelers turned around and headed back. And that small decision changed history. A local man approached them and offered a dog, a young bulldog, light-colored, friendly. Jackson had already been considering the idea of having a mascot for the trip, so he agreed. For $15, Bud joined the expedition. From that moment forward, he wasn't merely a passenger. He became part of the story. Bud quickly found his preferred place in the automobile, the front seat, facing forward, watching the world pass by, experiencing the strange new sensation of motorized travel alongside the men. But there was a problem: dust, lots of dust. Roads were unpaved. Every mile kicked clouds of dirt into the air. The dust blew directly back into the car and into the faces of its passengers, including Bud. So Jackson solved the problem. He bought the dog a pair of goggles, not as a publicity stunt, but as practical protection. The goggles allowed Bud to remain exactly where he wanted to be, up front, watching the road, and that image became iconic: a dog in goggles riding across America in an automobile. Even today it feels modern, almost playful, but at the time it represented something much larger: a country entering a new age, an age of movement, technology, possibility. Bud became the face of that transformation. After roughly 63 days, the journey ended. Bud, Jackson, and Crocker reached New York City. They had crossed a continent through breakdowns, detours, mud, dust, and roads that often seemed determined to stop them. But they succeeded, and in doing so, they completed the first successful automobile journey across the United States. Newspapers covered the story. People were fascinated, not just by the machine, but by the image. A bulldog in goggles crossing America. Bud became part of the legend. After the trip, life grew quieter. He remained with Jackson. No more historic expeditions. No more attempts to prove the impossible. Just everyday life. But he was never forgotten. In 1944, Horatio Nelson Jackson donated the Vermont Bud's goggles and materials from the journey to the Smithsonian Institution. Today, visitors can still see them. The car, the story, and Bud still sitting up front, still wearing the goggles, still facing forward, exactly as people remembered him. Bud's story was about movement. Old Drum's story was about loss. It didn't happen on a road. It happened in a courtroom. And unlike Bud, Old Drum became famous because he died. Old Drum belonged to Charles Burden, a farmer in Johnson County, Missouri. He wasn't a show dog. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't famous. He was simply a working dog, part of the farm, part of the household, part of daily life. But tensions were growing in the community. Sheep were valuable, and when livestock died, someone had to be blamed. A neighboring farmer named Leonidas Hornsby believed dogs were responsible for losses among local sheep. Eventually, he decided to take action himself. One night, Old Drum was roaming. Like many dogs of the era, he moved freely across the countryside. No leash, no fenced yard, no modern restrictions. And that night, Hornsby shot him. To Hornsby, it was a farmer protecting his property. To Charles Burden, it was something entirely different. It was his dog. The disagreement eventually reached a courtroom. At first glance, it seemed like a simple legal dispute. Property, responsibility, compensation. But Charles Burden hired an attorney named George Graham Vest, and Vest transformed the case into something larger. He didn't focus entirely on livestock, or property law, or damages. Instead, he spoke about loyalty, devotion, the relationship between a person and a dog. Near the end of his argument, he delivered words that would become famous, words that outlived the trial itself. He described the dog as the one absolutely unselfish friend that man can have in this selfish world. The jury ruled in Burden's favor, but the verdict wasn't what people remembered. The speech was. Those words spread far beyond Missouri, far beyond the courtroom, and eventually became part of American culture itself. Today, Old Drum is remembered through statues, memorials, and historical markers. visitors can still find monuments dedicated to his memory. But his greatest legacy may not be made of bronze or stone. It may be language. Because when people speak about dogs as man's best friend, they are echoing ideas made famous during the Old Drum trial. The case transformed a local dispute into a national statement about the bond between people and dogs, a bond many people already understood instinctively, but one that George Graham Best managed to put into words. Bud and Old Drum could not have been more different. One became famous because he traveled. The other became famous because he stayed home. One represented movement. The other represented loyalty. One helped people imagine what the future might look like. The other reminded them why dogs mattered in the first place. Yet both stories reveal something important. By the beginning of the 20th century, dogs were no longer simply present in American history. They were becoming part of the public conversation, named, recognized, remembered, not just for what they did, but for what they meant. Thank you for listening to America 250, The Dogs. Join me next time as we continue exploring the remarkable dogs who helped shape America's story. Because whether it was on a road that barely existed or in a courtroom where words changed history, the truth remained the same. Dogs weren't just there, they were with us. Because then, as now, we were a pack. I'm Andrea LaGrow, and I'll see you next time.